There was once a man who stood in front of the mirror every morning, not because he loved his reflection, but because he was terrified of what it might reveal if he looked away. He carried himself with grandeur, always dressed immaculately, always performing for the world. People admired him, envied him, even feared him. But when he closed the door at night, when the applause had faded, the silence was unbearable. He needed constant reminders of his worth, yet he could never feel worthy. And that is the paradox of the narcissist. On the surface, they seem invincible, glowing with confidence, dripping with charm, impossible to ignore. But beneath the performance lies a fragile self, endlessly searching for validation, endlessly terrified of being ordinary. The psychology of a narcissist is one of the most fascinating and tragic studies of the human condition. We often think of narcissism as arrogance, vanity, or self-obsession, but the truth is far more complex. Narcissism is not really about love of the self. In fact, it often comes from the absence of true self-love. It is about constructing a mask to hide the insecurity, the emptiness, the fear of not being enough. The narcissist doesn't adore themselves as much as they chase the illusion of admiration from others. They are addicted to the reflection, not the reality. And maybe, in some way, we all understand this. Haven't you ever posted something online and then checked again and again, waiting for likes, waiting for comments, waiting for proof that you are seen? Haven't you ever told a story in a way that made you seem just a little better, a little stronger, a little smarter than you really felt inside? That's a sliver of the narcissistic struggle, this hunger to be validated, this fear of being invisible. But with the narcissist, this hunger becomes a way of life. It becomes the central axis around which everything turns. And to understand them, we need to step into their inner world. Psychology gives us frameworks. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual defines narcissistic personality disorder as a pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. But those are just words on paper. What does it actually feel like? Imagine living inside a house with glass walls. Everyone can see in, but the moment you feel too exposed, you paint those walls with colors, shapes, illusions, anything to distract from the fact that deep down, you feel like an empty room. That's the emotional architecture of narcissism. One of the most striking things psychologists have found is that narcissists often come from two very different kinds of childhoods. On one side, there are the children who were excessively praised, told they were extraordinary, told they could do no wrong. On the other side, there are the children who felt invisible, neglected, or only loved when they achieved something remarkable. In both cases, the message was the same. Love is conditional. Love is earned through performance. And so the child grows into an adult who never feels safe just being themselves. Instead, they construct a version of themselves that looks invulnerable, a version that can win applause. But here's the haunting twist. The more applause they get, the emptier they often feel, because applause feeds the performance, not the person. It feeds the mask, not the soul. So they need more and more and more. This is why being close to a narcissist can feel like standing next to a black hole. No matter how much love you pour in, it never feels enough. And yet, they are not monsters. They are humans caught in a pattern of survival. What looks like arrogance is often armor. What looks like coldness is often fear. What looks like manipulation is often a desperate attempt to hold their fragile world together. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. Neuroscience has shown that narcissists often experience heightened activity in brain regions connected to self-referential thinking. They are hyper-aware of themselves in social contexts. Imagine walking into a room and constantly scanning, who's noticing me, who's admiring me, who's dismissing me. That endless self-monitoring creates an exhausting inner life, and yet from the outside it can look effortless. The smile, the story, the posture, it's all part of the performance. Now let's pause here and ask a question. If narcissists are so deeply insecure beneath the surface, why do so many of them succeed in leadership, entertainment, or business? Why are we drawn to them? The answer is uncomfortable because charisma is magnetic. Confidence, even when it's performed, makes people pay attention, and our society rewards attention more than authenticity. Think about it. The loudest voices get the stage, not always the wisest. The boldest claims spread faster than the most nuanced truths. Narcissists thrive in this environment because they know how to play the game. They know how to make themselves unforgettable. But here's the tragedy. The very thing that makes them succeed in public often isolates them in private. True intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires saying, I am afraid, I am flawed, I am human. But for the narcissist, those words feel unbearable, like exposing a wound that could never heal. So they keep the mask on, and in doing so, they often sabotage the very relationships they crave the most. Think about this paradox. Narcissists need people to survive, but they also fear people will see through them. They crave admiration but fear genuine intimacy. They want love but can't trust it unless it's constant, overwhelming, almost worshipful. This is why relationships with narcissists often feel like a cycle. Charm, intensity, then distance, coldness, withdrawal. It's not always calculated cruelty. Sometimes it's simply the cycle of a person who doesn't know how to be loved without performing. Psychologists call this the narcissistic wound. At the heart of narcissism is a wound so deep that the person spends their life protecting it. And here's the part that's easy to forget. That wound was usually formed in childhood, long before they had a choice. So when we think about narcissists, we shouldn't think of villains, but of children who learned to build a fortress because being defenseless was too dangerous. But if we stop here, we miss something profound, because narcissism is not just an individual psychology, it's also a mirror of our culture. We live in a world that constantly tells us to curate, to perform, to build brands out of our lives. We are rewarded for how we appear, not who we are. In that sense, aren't we all living in a slightly narcissistic age? We may criticize the narcissist, but we also consume their performances. We follow them, we celebrate them. The narcissist is not an alien. They are simply an exaggerated reflection of what society already values. Attention, admiration, image. And maybe that's why the study of narcissism matters. It's not about labeling others as toxic or broken. It's about asking ourselves, where in my life am I performing instead of being? Where am I chasing admiration instead of authenticity? Where am I wearing a mask because I fear the world won't accept my unpolished self? Because here's the truth. Behind every narcissist's mask lies a story of fear, of longing, of pain, of survival. And when we reduce them to just arrogance or ego, we miss the human behind the performance. But I know what you might be wondering. If narcissism is so deeply woven into identity, can it ever change? Can a narcissist ever learn to love authentically, to let go of the mask, to live without the endless hunger for validation? That's the question we'll explore next. And the answer might surprise you, because it's not simple. It's not about breaking the mask overnight. It's about something much deeper. So, can a narcissist change? The answer is complicated. At the core of narcissism lies a paradox. The mask protects them, but it also imprisons them. They cannot take it off without feeling exposed, and yet they cannot truly connect while wearing it. For change to happen, there must be a moment when the pain of the mask outweighs the fear of vulnerability. Sometimes this happens through loss, relationships collapsing, careers faltering, the realization that admiration is not the same as love. Sometimes it happens through therapy, when a skilled professional slowly, gently, helps them see the child behind the armor. But even then, progress is fragile, because to ask a narcissist to drop the mask is to ask them to relive the very wound they've been protecting their entire lives. And yet, growth is possible. Psychologists have found that with time, self-reflection, and genuine support, some narcissists can learn to develop empathy, to accept imperfection, to trust in love that is not earned through performance. But this journey is not about destroying the ego. It's about softening it. It's about letting the self be human again, not extraordinary, not invincible, but simply enough. This brings us to a deeper truth. Narcissism, in many ways, is a universal struggle. Maybe we don't all wear masks as heavy. But don't we all wear masks of our own? Don't we all edit our lives before showing them to the world? Don't we all have moments where we'd rather be admired than understood? That's why this topic resonates so deeply, because in every narcissist's story, there's a reflection of our own. Think about the rise of social media. Think about the way it has reshaped our lives. The like button, the follower count, the curated image. Aren't these little seeds of narcissism that we water every day? We are encouraged to chase attention, to create versions of ourselves that shine brighter than our truth. And over time, we may even forget the difference. This is not to say that everyone online is a narcissist, but it is to say that our culture amplifies the narcissistic tendencies already within us. And when we judge the narcissist, maybe what we're really judging is our own hunger for approval reflected back at us, but magnified. Here's something that fascinates me. Researchers distinguish between two forms of narcissism: grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism. Grandiose narcissism is the classic image we know, the confident, charming, sometimes arrogant individual who seems larger than life. Vulnerable narcissism, on the other hand, is quieter, more hidden. These individuals may not boast or demand attention, but they still live with the same fragile self-esteem, the same hunger for validation, the same difficulty with genuine intimacy. Vulnerable narcissists might even appear shy, but beneath that shyness lies the same inner struggle. Why does this matter? Because it shows us that narcissism isn't always easy to spot. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice in the room, it's the quiet one who still fears rejection so deeply that they cannot allow themselves to be fully known. So let's return to the human level. What does it feel like to be close to a narcissist? Many people describe it as confusing. At first, there's often an intoxicating charm. They make you feel special, chosen, seen in ways you've never felt before. But slowly, cracks appear. The need for admiration becomes relentless. The relationship feels one-sided. And when you try to get closer, to touch the real self behind the mask, you may find distance, defensiveness, even coldness. It can feel like loving a mirage. You keep reaching, but the closer you get, the further it fades. But here's the perspective that changes everything. Narcissists are not simply manipulators. They are survivors. They learned early on that to be loved, they had to perform. And they never stop performing. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does explain it. And when you see it that way, the story of narcissism becomes less about ego and more about pain, less about arrogance and more about longing, less about selfishness and more about fear. So what can we learn from this? First, that empathy is not about excusing, but about understanding. When you understand the psychology of a narcissist, you begin to see the child behind the mask, the wound behind the armor. That doesn't mean you should allow yourself to be drained or mistreated. Boundaries are essential, but it does mean you can hold the truth with compassion. Narcissists are not evil. They are hurting. Second, we can turn the mirror on ourselves. Where in our own lives do we rely on performance instead of honesty? Where do we chase validation instead of connection? Where do we wear masks because we fear being seen as ordinary? The study of narcissism isn't just about them, it's about us. And third, we can remember that true strength is not in invincibility, but in vulnerability. The narcissist teaches us through their struggle that the human soul does not need applause. It needs acceptance. It does not need to be admired. It needs to be known. It does not need to be perfect. It needs to be real. Imagine just for a moment what would happen if a narcissist could drop the mask. Imagine if they could stand in front of the mirror and instead of needing to be extraordinary, they could whisper to themselves, "I am enough." That moment would be liberation. That moment would be healing. And maybe, in small ways, that is the journey for all of us. To take off the masks we wear. To be seen, not for the performance, but for the truth. Because here is the ultimate paradox. Narcissists crave love more than anything, but their very defenses against rejection make it impossible for them to truly receive it. And isn't that, in some way, the story of all of us? We long to be loved as we are, but we fear being rejected as we are. So we polish, we edit, we perform. But the performances keep us apart. while our souls crave closeness. The psychology of a narcissist, then, is not just a clinical category. It is a mirror of the human struggle between performance and authenticity, between fear and longing, between mask and self. To study them is to study ourselves. To judge them too harshly is to forget that their mask is only a heavier version of our own. So the next time you hear the word narcissist, remember, it is not just about ego. It is about survival. It is about the child who once thought, if I'm not perfect, I won't be loved. It is about the adult who still believes that voice, even after all these years. And it is about us too, because if we're honest, we all carry some version of that voice within us. The challenge then is not simply to analyze the narcissist, but to ask, how do we step into a life where we no longer need the mask? How do we build relationships where we can be ordinary, imperfect, real, and still loved? That is the deeper question, the one that takes us beyond psychology into philosophy, beyond diagnosis into meaning. And maybe the answer is simpler than we think. Maybe it begins with courage, the courage to sit with our own insecurities without rushing to cover them, the courage to be seen in our flaws and to let others be seen in theirs, the courage to let go of admiration and seek connection instead. Because in the end, the story of the narcissist is not just their story. It is a warning and a reminder. A warning of what happens when the mask becomes our whole identity. And a reminder that beneath all our performances, what we want most is not applause, it is love. So let me leave you with this thought. The psychology of a narcissist is not just about understanding others. It is about understanding ourselves. When we look at their mask, we are invited to notice our own. And when we see their wound, we are invited to tend to ours. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us find the courage to be real, then one day, even the most wounded among us will no longer need the mask at all.